I'm Autumn Wilson, 27, and living what most would call a successful life as a marketing executive in New York City. After a particularly challenging year, I was excited to drive back to my hometown for Thanksgiving, despite the increasingly strained relationship with my parents since I left. Nothing prepared me for what happened when I arrived at their doorstep clutching a homemade pumpkin pie. My parents blocked the entrance, faces stern, and said those unbelievable words, "You're not invited." I had no idea that family inheritance and my lifestyle choices would collide so catastrophically. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you want more stories about family betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. Growing up in Springfield, a quintessential Midwestern town where everyone knew everyone, I was raised by Martha and Robert Wilson in a home that valued tradition and community reputation above all else. Our two-story colonial house with the white picket fence was the perfect backdrop for what appeared to be the perfect American family. My parents were loving but strict disciplinarians who had clear expectations for their children. From an early age, I displayed an ambitious personality that sometimes clashed with my parents' traditional values. While they encouraged academic excellence, they always assumed I would follow in my mother's footsteps: college at the state university, marriage to a local boy, and a teaching career that would allow me to prioritize family. My father, who ran a successful insurance agency in town, often spoke about how he had turned down opportunities in larger cities to provide us with a proper upbringing in a small town. My high school years revealed the growing divide between my dreams and my parents' expectations. While they attended every debate competition and proudly displayed my academic awards, they would exchange worried glances whenever I talked about moving to New York or working for a multinational company. My guidance counselor once told them I was too big for this town, a comment my mother later cried about when she thought I couldn't hear. Senior year brought both triumph and tension. When I received a full scholarship to NYU, my parents' reaction was mixed at best. They smiled for photographs and told neighbors how proud they were, but in private, my father questioned whether I was throwing away real happiness for some fantasy life. My mother was more emotional, wondering aloud who would take care of me in that dangerous city and whether I would lose my values. Despite their reservations, they helped me move into my freshman dorm, my father stoically carrying boxes while my mother arranged my tiny closet, tears streaming silently down her face. The first 2 years of college, our relationship remained relatively stable. I came home for major holidays and called weekly. They visited once each semester, clearly uncomfortable navigating the city, but making an effort. Things began to shift during my junior year when I secured a prestigious marketing internship that prevented me from coming home for the entire summer. My decision to stay in New York was the first major crack in our relationship, with my father calling it a slap in the face to family. After graduation, I was thrilled to accept a position at a cutting-edge marketing firm in Manhattan. My parents attended my graduation ceremony but declined my invitation to celebrate afterward, claiming they needed to get on the road before dark. I tried not to let their early departure diminish my accomplishment, but their absence at what should have been a family celebration stung deeply. Over the next 4 years, I built a life I was proud of. My tiny first apartment in a 6th-floor walk-up gradually gave way to a stylish one-bedroom in Chelsea that I could actually afford. Weekend brunches with friends, museum exhibitions, and the vibrant energy of the city became my normal. Meanwhile, my calls home grew shorter and less frequent, often ending with subtle jabs about my extravagant lifestyle or questions about when I would grow out of this phase. The real tension began 3 years ago when I brought home Jason, a colleague who had become my boyfriend. His background as the son of immigrants from the Philippines, combined with his progressive political views, made for an uncomfortable Thanksgiving. My father barely spoke to him, while my mother asked a series of inappropriate questions about his people and their traditions. When Jason politely challenged my father's views on immigration during dinner, the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. We left the next morning instead of staying the planned weekend. Jason and I broke up 2 months later, but my parents continued to reference him as evidence of how that city has changed you. Last year marked a significant turning point. My promotion to senior marketing director came with increased responsibilities that included managing our firm's holiday campaign for a major client. When I called to explain I couldn't make it home for Thanksgiving due to work commitments, my mother's disappointment quickly turned to accusation. "Family clearly means nothing to you anymore," she said, her voice cold in a way I had never heard before. "You've chosen your fancy job over the people who raised you." My father got on the phone to add that I had completely lost touch with real American values and was turning into one of those coastal elites. The conversation ended with my mother saying perhaps it was better this way, since they hardly recognized who I had become. I spent Thanksgiving in my office, finalizing campaign details with a knot in my stomach, wondering how the distance between us had grown so vast. This year had been particularly challenging. A failed relationship, the stress of managing bigger clients, and a growing sense of isolation had me yearning for the comfort of home, despite the tensions. Our phone conversations leading up to Thanksgiving had been brief and loaded with passive-aggressive comments. My mother mentioned their plans to host extended family, but notably never extended an explicit invitation to me. Still, family was family. I convinced myself that showing up with a homemade pie and genuine desire to reconnect would break through whatever resentments had built up. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I packed my car with overnight essentials, carefully placed the pie I had spent hours perfecting on the passenger seat, and began the 8-hour drive from New York to Springfield. As I navigated through the changing landscape, from urban sprawl to rolling countryside, I rehearsed conversations in my head, determined to find common ground with my parents again. I stopped at a roadside farm stand to buy a beautiful autumn centerpiece as a peace offering, imagining my mother's face softening at the thoughtful gesture. This year will be different, I told myself as familiar landmarks began to appear. We're still family underneath it all. How utterly wrong I was. The November air carried that distinctive Midwestern crispness as I pulled onto Maple Street, where I had spent the first 18 years of my life. Golden leaves crunched beneath my tires, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across front yards decorated with pumpkins and corn husks. Despite the knot of anxiety in my stomach, a wave of nostalgia washed over me as I passed the Hendersons' house where I had built countless snowmen, the corner where I waited for the school bus, and finally, the familiar silhouette of my childhood home. I noticed immediately that something was different. The driveway was filled with cars I recognized as belonging to my Aunt Diane and Uncle Frank, my father's brother. My cousin Todd's pickup truck was parked along the curb, and there were at least 3 other vehicles I didn't immediately recognize. The windows glowed warmly, and I could hear the muffled sound of laughter and conversation from inside. My heart lightened. Perhaps this gathering was exactly what we needed. The presence of extended family might ease the tension between my parents and me. Carefully balancing the pumpkin pie in one hand and the autumn centerpiece in the other, I made my way up the brick pathway to the front door. The porch light cast a golden glow, and through the decorative glass panels of the door, I could see movement in the entryway. Taking a deep breath, I shifted the pie to free up a finger for the doorbell. The cheerful chime echoed inside, and the conversation momentarily quieted. Footsteps approached, and I straightened my shoulders, fixed a warm smile on my face. The door swung open to reveal my parents standing shoulder to shoulder, their expressions transforming from welcoming to shocked in an instant. "Autumn," my mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. She was wearing her holiday apron, the one with embroidered fall leaves that I had given her years ago. My father's face hardened, his grip on the door tightening. "What are you doing here?" The question struck me like a physical blow. It's Thanksgiving," I stammered, holding out the pie as if it explained everything. "I wanted to surprise you." They exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Behind them, I caught glimpses of family members in the living room, heads turning curiously toward the door. "You shouldn't have come," my father said, his voice lowered but firm. "You're not invited." The pie nearly slipped from my hands. "What do you mean?" "It's Thanksgiving. I'm your daughter." My mother glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping partially outside, pulling the door nearly closed behind her. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Your lifestyle choices aren't something we want to explain to the family. Not today. It would just create tension. I stood there, pie in hand, completely bewildered. My lifestyle choices? You mean living in New York? Having a career? You know exactly what we mean, my father interjected, joining us on the porch and closing the door firmly behind him. Your values, your politics, the people you associate with. This isn't the time or place, Autumn. Through the narrow opening of the door before it closed, I caught sight of my Aunt Diane looking our way with curiosity, my Uncle Frank raising a questioning eyebrow, and my cousins huddled near the fireplace. Smartphones temporarily forgotten as they observed the unfolding drama at the front door. You can't be serious, I said, my voice catching. You're turning me away? On Thanksgiving. My mother at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. My father simply crossed his arms, his stance unmovable. We think it's best for everyone. The family doesn't need to be part of our disagreements. The family? I repeated, incredulous. I am the family. These are my relatives too. Maybe next time we can plan something, just the three of us, my mother offered weakly, not meeting my eyes. When things aren't so complicated. Before I could respond, the door opened again, and my young cousin Amy peeked out. Aunt Martha, Uncle Robert, Grandma's asking when we're going to eat. My father turned to her with a smile that hadn't been offered to me. Tell her we'll be right in, sweetie. Just having a quick chat. Amy's eyes widened when she saw me. Autumn, are you joining us for dinner? I haven't seen you in forever. The awkward silence that followed was excruciating. My father cleared his throat. Autumn was just dropping something off. She has other plans tonight. The lie hit me like a slap. Amy's face fell with disappointment, but she nodded and disappeared back inside. My mother reached for the pie I was still somehow holding. I'll take that, she said quietly. Thank you for thinking of us. I held onto it for a moment longer, then released it into her hands, feeling as if I were surrendering much more than just a dessert. My father opened the door for my mother to step back inside, then turned to me one last time. It's better this way, he said, his voice devoid of the warmth I had once associated with him. Have a good evening, Autumn. And with that, the door closed firmly in my face. I stood there, still holding the centerpiece, listening to the sounds of my family, resuming their celebration without me. Someone laughed loudly. The TV turned on, probably for the football game my father never missed. Life continued on the other side of that door as if I had never arrived, as if I didn't exist at all. The walk back to my car felt endless. Each step on the familiar path seemed to echo with memories of running up to that same door as a child, excited to tell my parents about my day. Now, as an adult, I had been deemed unworthy of even crossing the threshold. I placed the centerpiece on the passenger seat where the pie had been and sat behind the wheel, unable to start the engine. Through the front windows of the house, I could see silhouettes moving about, the perfect picture of a family Thanksgiving. I watched as my father carved what was undoubtedly a turkey, my mother bringing dishes to the table, cousins helping to set out glasses. The scene was so normal, so familial, and I was on the outside looking in. My phone rang, startling me from my trance. My brother Kevin's name flashed on the screen. He was in California with his wife's family this year, unable to make it back to Springfield. Hey sis, his cheerful voice filled the car when I answered. Happy Thanksgiving. Did you make it home for the big family dinner? What's Mom's latest passive-aggressive comment about your job? The lump in my throat made it impossible to speak for a moment. Kevin must have sensed something was wrong. Autumn? You there? Yeah, I managed, turning the key in the ignition to drown out the sound of more laughter from the house. I'm here. Just not where I thought I'd be. The Lakeview Motel hadn't changed since high school, when it served as the scandalous destination for after-prom parties. The same faded blue doors, the same flickering neon sign missing the E in Lakeview, and likely the same tired floral bedspreads inside. I hadn't planned on spending Thanksgiving night in a roadside motel in my hometown, but driving 8 hours back to New York in my emotional state wasn't an option. Room 14 smelled of industrial cleaner barely masking decades of cigarette smoke. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my carefully chosen Thanksgiving outfit, staring at the wall-mounted TV playing a rerun of a sitcom Thanksgiving episode. The irony wasn't lost on me. On screen, a family argued then reconciled with heartwarming music in the background. In my reality, there had been no opportunity for argument, no chance for reconciliation, just a door quite literally closed in my face. My phone buzzed with a text message. Expecting it to be Kevin following up after our brief, tearful conversation, I was surprised to see my cousin Zoe's name instead. I can't believe what they did. Are you still in town? Meet me at Riverside Cafe in 30 minutes. Zoe had always been the family rebel before I claimed the title. 5 years older than me, she had moved to Chicago after high school, much to the family's disapproval. We weren't particularly close growing up due to the age difference, but we'd connected more as adults, sharing the experience of being family outliers. The Riverside Cafe was one of the few spots in Springfield open on Thanksgiving evening, catering to travelers passing through and locals escaping family obligations. The bell above the door announced my arrival, and I spotted Zoe immediately, her copper hair visible from the doorway. She stood and wrapped me in a tight hug when I approached. "This is so messed up," she said as we sat in a corner booth. I couldn't stay there after I realized what happened. "You left the dinner?" I asked, surprised. Zoe had always been independent, but openly defying family gatherings was a new level of rebellion. "I made up an emergency at work," she said, stirring her coffee. "But honestly, I probably won't be invited back after the things I said to Uncle Robert." The waitress came by and I ordered coffee, though what I really wanted was something stronger. When she walked away, Zoe leaned forward, her expression serious. "There's something you need to know, Autumn. This isn't about your lifestyle or political views or whatever nonsense they fed you on the porch." "Then what is it about?" I asked, the knot in my stomach tightening. "Because I've been racking my brain trying to understand what I did that was so terrible they wouldn't even let me in the house." Zoe took a deep breath. "It's about Grandma Wilson's will." "Grandma's will?" I repeated, confused. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," Zoe said grimly. "She changed it last month." "I know, because I drove her to her lawyer's office. She made me promise not to tell anyone, but after what happened today..." She paused, seeming to weigh her loyalty to our grandmother against her sense of justice. "You need to know the truth. My grandmother had always been a bright spot in family gatherings. While my parents grew increasingly disapproving of my choices, Grandma Wilson would slip me encouraging notes and ask genuine questions about my life in New York. At 92, she still lived independently in the small house where she had raised my father, though her health had been declining in recent years. "Grandma named you as the primary inheritor of the Wilson family property," Zoe continued. "The house, the land outside town, and the majority of her investments. Your parents were expecting to inherit everything, especially the land, which has become valuable since that tech company started buying up property for their new campus." The revelation hit me like a bucket of ice water. That can't be right. Grandma never said anything to me about this. "She didn't want to put you in an awkward position," Zoe explained. "She told me she was worried your parents would pressure you to decline the inheritance if they knew. She wanted it to be your decision when the time came." "But how do my parents know about this?" I asked, trying to process the information. "Your dad's friend works at the law firm. Attorney-client privilege apparently doesn't mean much in a small town." Zoe's expression was dark. "Your parents have been furious for weeks. Aunt Diane told me they've been telling everyone in the family that you manipulated Grandma, that you've been secretly visiting her and turning her against them." The coffee arrived, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. That's absurd. I haven't even been able to reach Grandma by phone lately. A sudden realization dawned. "They've been intercepting my calls, haven't they?" Zoe nodded. "And today's Thanksgiving dinner was basically a family tribunal. They've been poisoning everyone against you, making you out to be this greedy, manipulative person who abandoned the family but wants to swoop in and take the inheritance." The pieces began falling into place. The increasingly cold phone calls, the vague references to my betrayal, the extended family gathering to which I wasn't invited. This wasn't about my lifestyle choices at all. It was about money. "I had no idea about any of this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't care about the inheritance. I just wanted to have Thanksgiving with my family. I know. Zoe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's why I couldn't sit there and listen to them talk about you anymore. It's disgusting what they're doing. Do you have proof of this? I asked, still struggling to believe my parents could be so calculating. Zoe pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos. I took pictures of some documents when your mom left her purse unattended. And I have screenshots of text messages between your dad and Uncle Frank discussing their strategy for today. She slid the phone across the table. There, in black and white, was evidence of my family's betrayal. A photo of what appeared to be legal correspondence mentioning the changed will. Text messages where my father referred to me as ungrateful and discussed ways to present a united front to Grandma about why her decision was harmful to the family. Another message outlined talking points for Thanksgiving dinner, including how to respond if anyone defended me. My hand trembled as I scrolled through the evidence. The final image was a close-up of a handwritten note in my grandmother's distinctive script. My dearest Autumn, I've always admired your courage to forge your own path. This legacy is yours to use as you see fit. With all my love, Grandma. When did she write this? I asked, my voice breaking. During her last visit to the lawyer, Zoe said. She asked me to give it to you when the time was right. I think that time is now. I handed the phone back to Zoe, feeling hollow. The family I had driven 8 hours to see, the parents I had been so desperate to reconnect with, had orchestrated an elaborate deception, not because they disagreed with my choices, but because they wanted what they believed should be theirs. The worst part, Zoe continued, is that the property isn't even worth that much. Maybe a few $100,000 for the land. Your parents have plenty of money. This is about control, not need. I remembered my last visit with Grandma 6 months ago, how she had held my hand and told me she was proud of me for carrying on the true Wilson spirit. At the time, I thought she was just being supportive. Now I understood the deeper meaning behind her words. What do I do now? I asked, more to myself than to Zoe. That's up to you, she replied. But if it were me, I wouldn't let them get away with this. They're counting on you slinking back to New York none the wiser, while they continue to villainize you to the family and eventually contest the will. As the gravity of the situation sank in, my initial hurt began to transform into something else. The parents who had raised me to value honesty above all else had been lying not just to me, but to our entire family. The rejection at the door wasn't about protecting family harmony during a holiday. It was about protecting their narrative, a narrative in which I was the villain. I need to talk to Grandma, I said, newfound determination in my voice. She's in the Sunshine Valley Assisted Living now, Zoe informed me. Your parents moved her there last week, supposedly for her safety after a minor fall. But I think they wanted to limit who could visit her. The more I learned, the more my world seemed to be crumbling. My grandmother, isolated from those who truly cared about her. My parents, orchestrating a campaign against their own daughter. The extended family, unwittingly enlisted in their scheme. I'll go see her tomorrow, I decided. But first, there's something else I need to do. Zoe seemed to read my mind. You're going back to confront them, aren't you? Not tonight, I said, finishing my now cold coffee. They've had enough control over this situation. I'm going to approach this on my terms, not theirs. As we left the cafe, I hugged Zoe tightly. Thank you for telling me the truth. You're the only real family I seem to have right now. That's not true, she said firmly. Grandma adores you. And there are others who will stand by you once they know what's really going on. Don't let Aunt Martha and Uncle Robert make you think you're alone in this. Back in my motel room, I stared at the ceiling, processing everything I had learned. The rejection at the door had been painful enough when I thought it was about lifestyle differences. Now, knowing it was about inheritance money I didn't even want, the betrayal cut even deeper. My own parents had looked me in the eye and turned me away, all because they believed I had somehow stolen what they felt entitled to. Sleep eluded me as I planned my next steps. One thing was certain, I wouldn't be returning to New York defeated. It was time to face this head-on, to finally stand up to the conditional love and manipulative tactics that had shaped our family dynamic for too long. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, but tonight, I allowed myself to fully feel the grief of losing the parents I thought I had, and to mourn the family that existed only in my memories. Morning arrived with weak November sunlight filtering through the thin motel curtains. I had barely slept, my mind continuously cycling through memories, reinterpreting years of family interactions through the lens of what I now knew. Each recollection took on new meaning, my parents' increasing criticism of my independence, their subtle undermining of my relationships with extended family, their growing insistence that I wasn't respecting my heritage. It hadn't been about values at all. It had been about ensuring I remained the compliant daughter who wouldn't challenge their authority or their expectations, including their expectation of inheritance. After a shower that did little to refresh me, I dressed in clothes that felt like armor, a tailored blazer over a simple blouse, dark jeans, boots with a solid heel that made me stand taller. I wasn't going to face my parents looking like the rejected, wounded daughter they had turned away. I would meet them as the woman I had become, confident, successful, and no longer seeking their approval. The drive to my childhood home was brief, but heavy with purpose. The neighborhood was quiet, most residents either sleeping off Thanksgiving excess or out taking advantage of Black Friday sales. My parents' car sat alone in the driveway. The visitors from yesterday's gathering had dispersed. I parked on the street, took a deep breath, and approached the front door with determined steps. This time, I didn't bring gifts or peace offerings. I didn't rehearse conciliatory words or imagine warm reconciliations. I rang the doorbell and waited, hands steady, chin raised. My father opened the door, surprise registering on his face before his features hardened into the same stern expression from yesterday. He was still in his bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, the morning newspaper tucked under his arm, the picture of suburban normalcy that now seemed like a facade. "Autumn," he said flatly. "I thought we made ourselves clear yesterday." "Crystal clear," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "But I think there are some things we need to discuss." He moved to block the doorway more completely. "This isn't a good time." "It never is," I said, then added with deliberate emphasis, especially when it involves Grandma's will. The color drained from his face. His eyes darted to the street behind me, checking if neighbors might be witnessing this confrontation. Always concerned with appearances, my father. "I don't know what you're talking about," he attempted, but his voice lacked conviction. "I think you do. And we're going to talk about it, either out here where Mrs. Peterson across the street can hear everything or inside like civilized people. Your choice." The mention of the notoriously gossipy neighbor was strategic. My father stepped back reluctantly, allowing me to enter the house for the first time in over a year. The familiar scent of my mother's cinnamon coffee cake hung in the air, mixed with lingering turkey and sage from yesterday's meal. The house was immaculate as always, evidence of the gathering erased except for a vase of fresh flowers on the entry table, likely part of a centerpiece from dinner. "Robert? Who is at the door?" My mother's voice carried from the kitchen, the sound stopping me in my tracks. For a moment, I was 10 years old again, coming home from school to that same questioning call. "It's Autumn," my father answered, his tone conveying volumes. My mother appeared in the kitchen doorway, dishcloth in hand, her expression cycling rapidly from shock to wariness. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to talk about why you really turned me away yesterday," I said, stepping further into the house. "And it has nothing to do with my lifestyle choices." My mother glanced at my father, a silent communication passing between them. "I don't know what you're talking about," she echoed his earlier denial. "Let's not do this," I said, walking past them both into the kitchen, the heart of the home where all significant family discussions had always taken place. "Let's not pretend I don't know about Grandma changing her will." I turned to face them, leaning against the counter that had once been too high for me to reach. My parents followed, my father's posture defensive, my mother twisting the dishcloth in her hands. "Who told you?" my father finally asked, abandoning the pretense. "Does it matter? What matters is that you lied to me. You turned me away from a family Thanksgiving not because you disapprove of my life choices, but because you're angry about something I didn't even know about until last night." My mother sank into a kitchen chair. "You expect us to believe you had no influence on her decision? That you weren't working behind our backs? Yes, I expect you to believe that because it's the truth, I said firmly. I had no idea Grandma changed her will. I certainly never asked her to. When was the last time I even spoke with her? Oh wait, I can't remember because someone has been intercepting my calls. My father's face flushed. We were protecting her. You filled her head with your big city ideas, made her think her own son isn't good enough to. To what, Dad? To inherit what she worked for? To control her assets? Grandma is of sound mind. If she chose to change her will, that was her decision to make. After you turned her against us, my mother interjected, her voice rising. All those private conversations, asking about the family history, the property. We're not fools, Autumn. Those weren't manipulative conversations. I was genuinely interested in her life, her stories. When was the last time either of you actually listened to Grandma instead of just waiting for her to finish talking so you could tell her what to do? The kitchen fell silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock, another family heirloom, I realized, that had probably factored into their calculations. We built this family, my mother finally said, tears welling in her eyes. We dedicated our lives to creating stability, to upholding the Wilson name in this community. And now you get everything. The raw emotion in her voice would have moved me yesterday. Today, knowing what I knew, it just felt like another manipulation. I never wanted everything, I said quietly. I just wanted to be accepted for who I am. I drove 8 hours to have Thanksgiving with my family, not to claim an inheritance I didn't even know existed. You abandoned us, my father countered, his anger building. You took our sacrifices, our support, and then built a life that rejects everything we value. You left Springfield for your fancy city life, your progressive friends, my what, Dad? My career? My independence? My right to live authentically? When did those become crimes? When they came at the expense of family loyalty, he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. Family loyalty? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call organizing a family gathering specifically to exclude me? Telling lies about me to relatives? Planning to contest Grandma's will before she's even gone? My mother's head snapped up. How do you know about that? I know a lot more than you think, I said, pulling out my phone. I've seen the text messages, the legal correspondence, the talking points you prepared to turn the family against me. Their faces confirmed what I already knew. It was all true. They had been systematically working to isolate me, to discredit me, all because of money and property. You had no right to look at private communications, my father sputtered, but the defense sounded hollow even to him. And you had no right to intercept my calls to Grandma, I countered. No right to lie to our family about me. No right to make financial decisions for a woman who is still capable of making her own choices. The conversation was growing heated enough that our voices had risen considerably. Through the kitchen window, I noticed Mrs. Peterson pausing while retrieving her newspaper, clearly trying to catch snippets of our argument. Your grandmother doesn't understand the implications of what she's done, my mother insisted. She's being sentimental, not practical. That property has been in the Wilson family for generations. It should stay with those who remained loyal to Springfield, to the family legacy. And there it is, I said softly. This isn't about Grandma's well-being or even about family values. It's about what you think you're entitled to. What you think I don't deserve because I chose a different path. You never appreciated what we gave you, my father said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. The stable home, the community connections, the opportunities. You took it all and then turned your back on us. I never turned my back on you. The accusation stung because for years I had believed it was the other way around. I built a life I'm proud of, a life that makes me happy. I call, I visit when I can, I try to maintain a relationship despite your constant criticism. But it's never enough because what you really want isn't a relationship, it's control. My mother was openly crying now, but I couldn't tell if the tears were from genuine emotion or frustration at being confronted. I never cared about the money, I continued, my own emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I care that my own parents would rather lie to our entire family, would rather turn me away from Thanksgiving dinner, than simply talk to me honestly about their concerns. What were we supposed to say? My father demanded. That your grandmother betrayed decades of family tradition to favor the grandchild who barely visits? That she's throwing away the future security of multiple family members for someone who probably won't even keep the property in the family. Each word revealed more about their true feelings, their fear of losing control, their resentment of my independence. It was like watching the foundations of what I thought was my family crumble in real time. "You were supposed to love me unconditionally," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. "You were supposed to be happy that I've built a successful life, even if it's different from what you imagined. You were supposed to be my parents." The kitchen fell silent again. Outside, a car door slammed, and a neighbor called to another about Black Friday sales. Normal life continuing while my world was imploding. "We do love you," my mother finally said, though the words rang hollow after everything that had transpired. "We just don't understand the choices you've made." "No, you don't understand that they're my choices to make," I corrected her. "And apparently, they're Grandma's choices to make too." "Have either of you even asked her why she changed her will? Have you considered that maybe she has reasons that have nothing to do with me manipulating her?" From their expressions, it was clear they hadn't. They had been so consumed by what they perceived as their right to the inheritance that they had never considered their mother's agency in the decision. "I'm going to see Grandma today," I informed them, straightening up from where I had been leaning against the counter. "Not to discuss the will or the inheritance, but because she's my grandmother and I love her. And then I'm going to decide what to do next based on what she wants, not what either of you want." "You can't just," my father began, but I cut him off. "I can and I will. And know this, if you've been mistreating her or isolating her to try to pressure her into changing her mind, that ends today." I moved toward the door, emotionally exhausted, but somehow lighter for having spoken my truth. "Autumn, wait," my mother called, following me to the entryway. "We're still your parents." "We still. Are you?" I asked, turning to face her one last time. "Because parents don't do what you did yesterday. They don't orchestrate campaigns against their children. They don't use family gatherings as weapons." My father had followed too, his anger seemingly deflated by my directness. "You don't understand what's at stake here." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "And I think you both need to ask yourselves what's really at stake, a piece of property or your relationship with your daughter. Because right now, it seems you've made your choice." I opened the door, stepping out into the late morning sunlight. For the second time in 2 days, I was leaving my childhood home feeling rejected, but this time, I was also leaving with clarity. The conditional love, the manipulation, the expectations that had shaped our relationship for years, it all made sense now. And while the truth was painful, it was also freeing. "This isn't over," my father called after me. "You're right about that," I replied without turning back. "It's just beginning." After leaving my parents' house, I drove aimlessly through Springfield, retracing routes I had traveled thousands of times in my youth. Past Springfield High School with its faded mascot painted on the gymnasium wall. Around the town square where I had worked summer jobs at the ice cream parlor and the bookstore. Through neighborhoods where childhood friends had lived, some of whom had stayed and built lives that mirrored their parents, others who had left and rarely returned. Eventually, I found myself at Lakeside Park, a small green space overlooking the town's namesake lake. In high school, it had been the place to escape parents and teachers, to dream about futures beyond Springfield's borders. Now, on this cold November morning, it was deserted except for a few dedicated joggers bundled against the chill. I sat on a bench facing the water, watching geese create ripples across the surface. The confrontation with my parents had left me emotionally drained, but also strangely calm. The truth, however painful, was preferable to the manipulative facade that had characterized our relationship for years. "Autumn? Autumn Wilson, is that you?" The voice came from behind me, familiar but unexpected. I turned to see Mr. Harrison approaching, my high school English teacher who had been the first to encourage my writing and my dreams beyond Springfield. "Mr. Harrison," I said, genuine warmth in my voice for the first time since arriving in town. "It's good to see you." "Tom, please," he insisted, gesturing to the bench. "Mind if I join you? My morning constitutional isn't complete without a rest by the lake." He sat beside me, still recognizable despite the gray that had overtaken his once brown hair and the additional lines around his eyes. At 60-something, he had the same kind expression and attentive gaze that had made him a favorite among students. "I heard you were making waves in New York," he said with a smile. "Marketing executive now, right?" "I always knew you'd do great things." "News travels fast in Springfield," I remarked, surprised he knew about my career. "I make it a point to keep track of students who took my advice to heart," he replied. "Though I must admit, social media makes it easier these days." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a heron land gracefully near the water's edge. "So," he finally said, "what brings you to a freezing park bench the day after Thanksgiving instead of enjoying family time?" The simple question, asked with genuine interest rather than judgment, broke something open in me. Before I could stop myself, I was telling him everything: the rejection at the door, the revelations about the will, the confrontation this morning. The words poured out of me, unfiltered and raw. Mr. Harrison, Tom, listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When I finally ran out of words, he sighed deeply. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," he said. "But I've been teaching in this town for 35 years. I've seen this pattern before: families who can't accept when their children outgrow the boundaries they've set." "Did you know my grandmother changed her will?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Elizabeth Wilson and I serve on the library board together. She mentioned making some changes to her estate planning recently, though not the specifics. She seemed very at peace with whatever decisions she had made." The fact that my grandmother was still active in community organizations despite my parents' claims about her declining health was yet another revelation. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. I never wanted to be at the center of a family inheritance drama. I just wanted, I don't know, a normal relationship with my parents. Tom chuckled softly. "In my experience, there's no such thing as a normal family relationship. There are just different varieties of complicated." His pragmatic view was refreshing after the heightened emotions of the past 24 hours. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I'm going to visit my grandmother this afternoon," I said. "Beyond that, I honestly don't know." "Well," Tom said after a moment's consideration, "I know it's not the Thanksgiving you planned, but my wife Alice is hosting a bit of an orphan's dinner tonight. Friends who don't have family nearby or who need a break from their own relatives. You'd be more than welcome to join us." The unexpected invitation caught me off guard. I wouldn't want to impose. "Nonsense," he waved away my concern. "Alice always cooks for an army, and we have a tradition of welcoming last-minute guests. In fact, it's become our favorite part of the holiday, connecting with people outside our usual circle." The genuine warmth of his invitation was a stark contrast to my parents' rejection. "I'd like that," I found myself saying. "Thank you." "Excellent," he beamed, pulling out his phone. "Let me text you the address." We eat around 6, but people start gathering earlier. Very casual, very relaxed. As we exchanged contact information, I felt a small spark of hope rekindling. Perhaps this Thanksgiving wouldn't be a complete disaster after all. We parted ways shortly after, Tom continuing his walk around the lake, me heading back to my car with plans to visit Sunshine Valley Assisted Living. Before I could start the engine, my phone rang, an unknown local number. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Autumn? Is that you, dear?" The wavering voice of my grandmother sent a rush of emotion through me. "Grandma." "Yes, it's me. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "Oh, I know, sweetheart. These new helpers they've assigned me are always forgetting to bring me the phone. But I saw Tom Harrison at breakfast in the dining room, and he mentioned running into you." I cornered one of the nicer aides and insisted she let me call right away. My grandmother's mental acuity contradicted everything my parents had implied about her condition. "I was planning to visit you today," I told her. "Wonderful. Come for lunch. The food here is atrocious, but we can laugh about it together. And Autumn? We have much to discuss, away from certain interfering parties." Her conspiratorial tone made me smile despite everything. "I'll be there at noon, Grandma." "Perfect. And Autumn? I'm so glad you came home, even under these circumstances." After hanging up, I sat in my car contemplating how quickly life could change. 24 hours ago, I had been driving to Springfield full of hope for family reconciliation. Now I was navigating family betrayal, unexpected allies, and a grandmother who was clearly more aware of the situation than anyone had given her credit for. The Tom Harrison household proved to be exactly the balm my wounded spirit needed. Their craftsman-style home on Elm Street was filled with books, eclectic art, and the most diverse group of people I had encountered since leaving New York. Alice Harrison, a retired pediatrician with silver hair and infectious laugh lines, welcomed me as if she had been expecting me all along. "Tom told me about your situation," she said quietly as she took my coat. "Just so you know, we're a judgment-free zone here. Everyone at this gathering has a complicated family story." The living room was filled with about 15 people of various ages and backgrounds. Tom introduced me around. There was his colleague from the English department and her wife, a graduate student who couldn't afford to fly home to California, an elderly neighbor whose children lived abroad, a young couple who had recently moved to town and didn't know anyone yet, and several others whose connections to the Harrisons weren't immediately clear, but who were clearly comfortable in this space. "We call it our chosen family Thanksgiving," Alice explained as she handed me a glass of wine. "Blood relationships are just one type of connection. Sometimes the family we build is more nourishing than the one we're born into." The contrast between this warm, accepting gathering and the cold rejection at my parents' door couldn't have been more stark. Here, differences in age, background, and life choices were topics of interested conversation rather than judgment. People shared stories of their own family complications without shame or defensiveness. During dinner, served buffet-style with everyone finding seats wherever they could throughout the house, Alice sat beside me on the window seat in the dining room. "Tom mentioned you had a difficult encounter with your parents," she said, her voice kind but not pitying. "I hope you don't mind, but that struck a chord with me. My own parents disowned me when I decided to go to medical school instead of marrying my high school boyfriend." "What happened?" I asked, grateful for someone who might understand my experience. 30 years of estrangement," she said matter-of-factly. "They missed my medical school graduation, my wedding to Tom, the adoption of our children. By the time my father was ready to reconcile, my mother had passed away, and he was in the early stages of dementia. We had 3 good years before he died." "That's heartbreaking," I said, trying to imagine decades of the pain I was currently feeling. "It was," she agreed. "But it also taught me something valuable. Family is ultimately about choice. My parents chose their rigid expectations over a relationship with me. I chose to create a different kind of family, one based on acceptance rather than control." Her words resonated deeply with my current situation. "My visit with my grandmother today was eye-opening," I shared. "She's completely lucid and fully aware of what my parents have been doing. She changed her will deliberately, not because I influenced her, but because she wanted to break a pattern she sees in the family." "Sounds like a wise woman," Alice commented. "She is. She told me that property and inheritance have been used as control mechanisms in the Wilson family for generations. Her own father-in-law threatened to disinherit my grandfather if he married her because she was too independent-minded. She doesn't want that pattern to continue." Before Alice could respond, my phone rang. Seeing my brother Kevin's name on the screen, I excused myself to take the call in the Harrisons' peaceful backyard. "Autumn, what the hell is going on?" Kevin demanded without preamble. "I just got off the phone with Dad, and he's saying you're trying to steal Grandma's property? That you've been manipulating her behind everyone's backs." The accusations, now coming from my brother, stung anew. "None of that is true, Kevin. Have you talked to Grandma?" "No, Dad said she's not well enough for lengthy calls." "That's another lie," I said firmly. "I spent 3 hours with her today. She's sharp as ever and fully aware of what she's doing with her will. More importantly, she's aware of how Mom and Dad have been intercepting her calls and isolating her." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I don't know what to believe," Kevin finally said, his voice uncertain. "Then talk to Grandma yourself," I urged. "Don't take my word for it, and definitely don't take Mom and Dad's. Call Sunshine Valley Assisted Living directly and ask to speak with Elizabeth Wilson. Judge for yourself if she sounds mentally incompetent." "This is so messed up," Kevin sighed. "I'm supposed to be enjoying Thanksgiving with Megan's family, not dealing with some Wilson family civil war. I know, and I'm sorry. But Kevin, you need to understand that I didn't start this. I drove 8 hours to have Thanksgiving with the family, and they literally shut the door in my face. Then I found out it was all because of money I didn't even know about or ask for. Another long pause. I'll call Grandma, he finally promised. And Autumn? I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. That's really twisted, regardless of what else is going on. His acknowledgement of the wrong done to me brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thanks, Kev. That means a lot. I'll call you back after I talk to Grandma, he said. And hey, maybe I could visit you in New York soon? It's been too long. I'd like that, I said, realizing how much I missed my brother, who had always been caught in the middle of the family dynamics. When I returned inside, the gathering had evolved into smaller conversation groups, with Tom leading an animated discussion about classic literature in one corner, while Alice and several others played a board game at the dining table. No one pressured me to share what had happened on the phone or to explain my slightly red eyes. They simply made space for me to rejoin when I was ready. As the evening progressed, I found myself sharing stories of New York, listening to tales of small-town Springfield I had never heard despite growing up here, and laughing more than I had in months. When it was time to leave, both Tom and Alice hugged me warmly. Remember, Alice said as she walked me to the door, family is what you make it. Sometimes the most healing relationships are the ones we choose for ourselves. Back at the Lakeview Motel, I found myself unexpectedly at peace. This Thanksgiving had been nothing like what I had planned, but it had given me something I desperately needed: clarity about my family and a reminder that connection could be found in unexpected places. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Talked to Grandma. You're right about everything. We need to talk tomorrow. Love you, sis. It wasn't the family reconciliation I had driven to Springfield hoping for, but it was a start. And for the first time since arriving, I felt grateful to be here, facing these truths head-on rather than continuing in blissful ignorance of what my family had become. The following morning brought a clarity that only a good night's sleep after emotional upheaval can provide. I woke in my motel room with a sense of purpose that had been missing since the moment my parents turned me away from their door. Today would not be about hurt feelings or shocked reactions. It would be about finding a path forward that honored truth and set boundaries that should have been established years ago. After a quick breakfast at the diner across from the motel, I drove to Sunshine Valley Assisted Living for my promised follow-up visit with Grandma Wilson. The facility was nicer than I had expected, a modern, single-story building surrounded by well-maintained gardens now dormant for winter. Inside, the common areas were bright and welcoming, with residents engaged in various activities despite it being the day after a major holiday. My grandmother was waiting in the small private courtyard attached to her room, bundled in a thick cardigan despite the temperature-controlled environment. At 92, she remained a striking figure, tall and straight-backed, her white hair elegantly styled, her blue eyes sharp and observant. She smiled broadly when she saw me. Twice in 2 days, she remarked as I bent to hug her. I should get disinherited by my children more often. Her dry humor startled a laugh out of me. So you know about all of that? My dear, she patted the chair beside her. Very little happens in this family that I don't eventually learn about, despite their best efforts to keep me in the dark. Kevin called last night after you spoke with him. He was quite disturbed by what he's discovered. I sat beside her, taking her weathered hand in mine. I'm so sorry you've been caught in the middle of this, Grandma. Caught in the middle, she chuckled. Autumn, I deliberately placed myself in the middle. These family patterns don't break themselves. Her directness was refreshing after the manipulative communications that had characterized the past 2 days. Why didn't you tell me about changing your will? I asked. She sighed, looking out at the small garden where a stone birdbath stood empty for the season. I considered it, but I knew my son would immediately accuse you of influencing my decision. I wanted to protect you from that accusation for as long as possible. It didn't work, I noted wryly. No, she agreed. Robert found out through that weasel Frank Peters at the law firm. Attorney-client privilege apparently means nothing when golf club memberships are at stake. The familiar spark of indignation in her voice reminded me so much of myself that I couldn't help smiling. My grandmother had always been fiercely independent, a quality that my father had described as difficult throughout my childhood. "I want you to understand why I made this decision," she continued, her expression growing serious. "It wasn't about favoring you over your father or punishing anyone. It was about breaking a cycle." For the next hour, my grandmother shared family history I had never heard before, how property and inheritance had been weaponized through generations of Wilsons. Her father-in-law had threatened to disinherit my grandfather if he married her because she was a teacher who had ideas above her station. Later, my grandfather had used the promise of inheritance to try to control my father's college and career choices, leading to decades of resentment and eventual capitulation. "Your father chose security over his dreams," she explained. "He wanted to study architecture at a school out east, but his father insisted he stay local and take over the insurance business. The family property became both the carrot and the stick. And Dad's doing the same thing," I realized aloud. "Exactly. When you left for New York despite their disapproval, you broke the pattern for your generation. I changed my will to ensure the pattern stays broken. But why leave everything to me? Why not split it between Dad and me, or include Kevin?" "Because Kevin never stood up to them," she said simply. "He's a wonderful grandson, but he's followed the path of least resistance. You were the only one willing to forge your own way despite the cost. I trust you to use the inheritance fairly and wisely, without using it as a control mechanism." The weight of her faith in me was both touching and intimidating. "What exactly are we talking about, Grandma? What assets are involved?" She reached for a folder on the small table beside her. "I had my lawyer prepare this summary for you. The main assets are the original Wilson family home where I lived until recently, 5 acres of land outside town that's become valuable due to development in the area, and my investment portfolio, which is modest but well managed." I scanned the documents, surprised by the total value. "This is a significant amount, but not the fortune Mom and Dad seem to think." "No," she agreed. "Their reaction isn't really about the money. It's about control and family dynamics. Your father expected to inherit everything as the only child, just as his father did before him. He saw it as his right, his reward for staying in Springfield and carrying on the family legacy. We discussed options for moving forward, including my growing conviction that the inheritance needed to be structured in a way that benefited the family without enabling toxic patterns. By the time our conversation concluded, we had outlined a plan that felt both fair and purposeful. "I think it's time we had a direct conversation with my parents," I said finally. "Would you be willing to come with me?" My grandmother's eyes sparkled with something between mischief and determination. "I thought you'd never ask." 2 hours later, after helping Grandma navigate the facility's sign-out procedures and a quick lunch at her favorite local cafe, we pulled into my parents' driveway. Their surprise at seeing us together was evident in their expressions when they opened the door, shock quickly masked by forced politeness for my grandmother's benefit. "Mother," my father said stiffly, "we weren't expecting you. The facility didn't call to say you were leaving today." "Because I'm not a prisoner, Robert," she replied pleasantly. "I'm still capable of deciding when and where I go. Are you going to invite us in, or shall we have this conversation on the porch like you did with Autumn on Thanksgiving?" The pointed reference to their rejection of me caused my mother to flush with embarrassment. They stepped back, allowing us to enter the house. We settled in the living room, Grandma and I on the sofa, my parents taking the armchairs opposite us. "I understand there's been some confusion about my estate planning," my grandmother began without preamble. "I'd like to clear that up once and for all." "Mother, if Autumn has been pressuring you," my father started. "She hasn't," Grandma cut him off firmly. "In fact, until yesterday, she knew nothing about my decision. Which you would know if you had actually asked me instead of intercepting my calls and spreading lies about your own daughter." My mother looked down at her hands, while my father's jaw tightened. "The changes to my will were my decision alone," Grandma continued. "Based on patterns I've observed in this family for decades, patterns I had hoped would end with your generation, Robert, but which I've seen you perpetuate with your own children." "What patterns?" my mother asked defensively. We've only wanted what's best for our children. No, I interjected gently. You've wanted what you think is best, which is for us to live the lives you've chosen for us. Kevin complied, and I didn't. That's the real issue here. My grandmother nodded approvingly at my insight. The Wilson family has used inheritance as a control mechanism for 3 generations that I know of. I'm ending that tradition now. For the next hour, we engaged in the most honest conversation our family had ever had. My grandmother spoke candidly about her observations of family dynamics, while I shared the impact their conditional approval had had on me over the years. My parents initially responded with defensiveness, but as the conversation progressed, small cracks appeared in their unified front. I never meant to push you away, my mother admitted at one point, tears in her eyes. I just don't understand the choices you've made. This life you've built seems so foreign to everything we raised you to value. That's because you've never really tried to understand it, I replied. You've judged it from a distance, through the lens of your own fears and preferences. You've never asked me why I love my life in New York, why my career fulfills me, what my friends and community there mean to me. My father remained more resistant, particularly when my grandmother outlined her decision to name me as the primary inheritor of the family assets. So we're to be punished for wanting our daughter to maintain connection to her roots, he demanded. This isn't punishment, Robert, Grandma said firmly. It's a recognition that the old ways of thinking about family legacy need to change. And I'm not excluding you entirely. This was the opening for me to present the plan we had developed earlier. Grandma and I have discussed a different approach, I explained. We'd like to establish the Wilson Family Education Fund, using the majority of the assets. I outlined our vision, a trust that would provide educational opportunities for all family members, regardless of whether they chose traditional or non-traditional paths. The family home would be sold, with proceeds going into the trust. The land outside town, which had development potential, would be evaluated for either sale or limited development with an emphasis on community benefit. The fund would be managed by a board consisting of family members, including both of you, and an independent trustee, I explained. Decisions would be made collectively based on established criteria, not individual preferences or attempts to control others' choices. My parents listened with surprised attention as I detailed how this approach would benefit current and future generations while removing the inheritance as a source of family conflict. You've clearly put thought into this, my father acknowledged reluctantly. I have, I confirmed. Because despite everything, I still believe in the concept of family legacy, just not one based on geographic location or conformity to a single vision. My grandmother reached over to squeeze my hand. This is exactly why I made the decision I did. Autumn understands that legacy is about values and opportunities, not control and obligation. The conversation continued as we refined the concept, addressing my parents' concerns and incorporating some of their suggestions. While there was no dramatic reconciliation or tearful group hug, by the time we prepared to leave, a framework for moving forward had been established. I won't pretend I'm happy about all of this, my father said as he walked us to the door. But I shouldn't have turned you away on Thanksgiving. That was wrong, regardless of other circumstances. Coming from my father, this halting, almost apology was significant. I nodded in acknowledgement, not quite ready to offer easy forgiveness, but willing to accept this small step. We'll be in touch about next steps for the trust, I said. And maybe we can try a family dinner again sometime. On neutral ground. My mother looked hopeful at this suggestion. We'd like that, she said, glancing at my father for confirmation. He gave a short nod, his expression still guarded but no longer hostile. As Grandma and I drove away, she patted my knee. Progress, she said simply. Not perfection, but progress. That evening, I had a final dinner with my unexpected support system. Zoe joined me at Mr. Harrison's house, where the previous night's Thanksgiving orphans had reconvened for leftovers and board games. Kevin called during dessert, and I put him on speakerphone to include him in our planning for the Wilson Family Education Fund. He sounded enthusiastic about the concept and promised to fly to New York in December to help work out the details. The evening ended with promises to stay connected, not just with Kevin and Grandma, but with Zoe, who had proven herself to be not just a cousin but a true ally, and with the Harrisons, whose warmth and wisdom had provided sanctuary when I needed it most. As I packed my car for the return journey to New York, I realized I was leaving Springfield with something I hadn't expected, not the simple family reconciliation I had hoped for when I arrived, but a deeper understanding of family patterns and a clear vision for breaking them. The rejection at my parents' door had been painful, but it had also been the catalyst for conversations that were decades overdue. The inheritance that had caused so much strife would now become a tool for positive change rather than control. My relationship with my parents remained complicated, but at least now the complications were acknowledged rather than disguised behind false harmony. And most importantly, I had confirmed what I had always suspected, that family could be defined by love and support rather than blood and obligation. The highway stretched before me as I began the long drive back to New York, Thanksgiving weekend traffic heavy, but moving steadily. Unlike the journey to Springfield, filled with rehearsed conversations and nervous anticipation, this return trip carried a sense of resolution. Not everything was fixed. Some things might never be fully repaired, but I was no longer carrying the burden of seeking approval I might never receive. My phone rang through the car speakers. Kevin again. "One more thing before you get too far," he said when I answered. "I'm really proud of you, sis. For standing up to them, for finding a solution that works for everyone, for not letting them make you into someone you're not. I should have done it years ago." His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thanks, Kev. That means a lot. Drive safe," he said. "New York's lucky to have you, even if Mom and Dad don't see it that way yet." As I continued eastward, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for years. The Thanksgiving rejection had forced me to confront painful truths, but in doing so, it had also freed me to build relationships based on authenticity rather than expectation. Sometimes, I realized, the door that closes in your face is the one you needed to stop knocking on anyway. 3 months later, I stood at my apartment window watching snow fall gently over New York City. The Christmas season had transformed the concrete jungle into a wonderland of lights and decorations, a stark contrast to the emotional darkness I had experienced during Thanksgiving. My Chelsea apartment, once just a symbol of my independence, now felt like a true sanctuary, a place where I could be authentically myself without judgment or conditions. The Wilson Family Education Fund had been established shortly before Christmas, with the legal documents signed during a surprisingly civil meeting attended by my parents, Kevin, Grandma, and me. The family home had sold quickly to a young couple expecting their first child, bringing Grandma a sense of satisfaction that new life would fill those rooms. The land outside town was still being evaluated for development options, with an emphasis on creating affordable housing that would benefit the community, a purpose that even my father had grudgingly admitted was worthwhile. My relationship with Grandma had blossomed into something even stronger through our weekly phone calls, unintercepted now that she had her own cell phone and had become surprisingly adept at texting and video chats for a nonagenarian. Her wisdom and perspective continued to guide me, especially as I navigated the complicated new dynamics with my parents. Our communication remained limited and careful, holiday cards exchanged, occasional text messages, one brief phone call on Christmas Day. The wounds were still healing, the trust still being rebuilt incrementally. I had no illusions about a perfect reconciliation, but there was a new honesty between us that felt like the foundation for something healthier than what we had before. Cousin Zoe had become a regular presence in my life, our shared experience during Thanksgiving creating a bond that weekly video chats and planned spring visit to Chicago would only strengthen. She had stood firm in her support of me even when other family members pressured her to pick a side, and her courage had inspired several cousins to reach out independently, curious about the real story behind the Thanksgiving drama. The Harrisons remained unexpected but treasured connections. Tom and I exchanged emails about books and writing, while Alice occasionally sent care packages with homemade cookies and thoughtful notes about creating chosen family. Their kindness during my darkest moment in Springfield had shown me what genuine acceptance looked like, something I had rarely experienced from my biological family. The most significant transformation, however, had come in my relationship with Kevin. True to his word, he had visited New York in December, spending a long weekend exploring my world with genuine curiosity rather than the preemptive judgment our parents had always displayed. We had talked more openly than ever before about our childhood, our different coping mechanisms for dealing with our parents' expectations, and our hopes for building a stronger sibling relationship independent of family dysfunction. "I always envied your courage," he had admitted over dinner in my favorite neighborhood restaurant. "The way you just left and built your own life, regardless of what they thought." I took the easier path, and I've wondered sometimes what I gave up by doing that. His vulnerability had created space for mine. "I've envied your ability to maintain a relationship with them without constant conflict," I had confessed. "The price of my independence has been this constant sense of disapproval, of never being good enough in their eyes." We had promised to visit each other more regularly, to support each other's choices without judgment, to be the family we needed when our parents couldn't fulfill that role. My therapy journey, begun in the aftermath of Thanksgiving, had helped me process the family trauma I had normalized for so long. Each session peeled back layers of conditioning, the belief that love was contingent on compliance, that family approval was the ultimate measure of success, that setting boundaries was somehow a betrayal of blood ties. "You're not responsible for their emotions or expectations," my therapist reminded me regularly. "You're only responsible for living authentically and setting healthy boundaries." This mantra had become something of a personal credo, especially when doubts crept in or when well-meaning friends suggested I should just forgive and forget for the sake of family harmony. I was learning that true forgiveness didn't require forgetting or pretending harm hadn't occurred. It meant releasing the expectation that my parents would ever be different than they were, while protecting myself from further hurt. Professionally, I had channeled the emotional clarity gained from the Thanksgiving experience into unprecedented success. My ability to set boundaries, to trust my instincts, and to advocate for my vision had led to the most successful marketing campaign of my career. My boss had noted the change during my year-end review. "There's a confidence in your presentations lately, a certainty that wasn't there before," she had observed. "Whatever sparked this transformation, keep it going." Little did she know that being literally turned away from my family home had been the catalyst for this new professional assurance. Once you've survived your deepest fear, rejection by those who are supposed to love you unconditionally, business challenges lose much of their power to intimidate. The holidays had brought an opportunity to create new traditions that honored authentic connections rather than obligatory relationships. Instead of forcing myself to participate in celebrations that left me feeling diminished, I had hosted a Christmas gathering for friends who, like me, had complicated family situations. We had shared stories, laughter, and the freedom to acknowledge both the joy and pain that holidays often entail. As I continued to watch the snow transform the city, my phone chimed with a text from Kevin, "Just booked tickets for spring break. The kids can't wait to see their cool aunt in the big city." This simple message represented everything that had changed since Thanksgiving: the shift from obligation to genuine desire for connection, the freedom to create family bonds based on mutual respect rather than expectation. The painful rejection at my parents' door had ultimately given me an unexpected gift: the permission to define family on my own terms. I no longer needed to seek validation from people who could only offer conditional acceptance. Instead, I could nurture relationships that supported my authentic self and let go of the exhausting effort to be someone I wasn't. Next Thanksgiving would be different. I had already begun planning to host my chosen family in my apartment: Kevin and his family, Grandma if she felt up to traveling, Zoe, perhaps the Harrisons, and friends who had become as close as siblings over the years. There would be no performing, no walking on eggshells, no pretending to be someone I wasn't to earn a seat at the table. Everyone invited would be there because they genuinely wanted to be, because they valued authentic connection over obligation or appearance. The journey from rejection to resolution hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Standing at my window as the snow continued to fall, I reflected on how sometimes the most painful moments can become catalysts for the most profound growth. Being turned away from my childhood home had forced me to confront the truth about my family dynamics and, in doing so, had freed me to build a life based on genuine love rather than conditional acceptance. The door that had closed in my face on Thanksgiving had ultimately opened a path to something far more valuable: the courage to define family based on love, respect, and acceptance rather than DNA or obligation. Sometimes, the family we create matters more than the family we're born into. Have you ever experienced rejection from those who were supposed to love you unconditionally? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video if my journey resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations, and share with anyone who might be struggling with family expectations this holiday season. Remember, you're not alone, and sometimes the most painful moments can lead to the most beautiful transformations. Thank you for being part of my journey, and I wish you the courage to create your own definition of family, whatever that looks like for you.